Queen Street United Methodist Church in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Wesley Bible class. Today we are doing Deuteronomy chapter 15, which has to do with the sabbatical year, an interesting concept. So we're going to go over some of the economic restrictions that take place within ancient Jewish culture, something that sets them apart from other cultures altogether. So let's get started. Every seventh year you shall grant remission of debts, and this is the manner of the remission. Every creditor shall remit the claim that is held against a neighbor, not exacting it of a neighbor who is a member of the community, because the Lord's remission has been proclaimed. Of a foreigner you may exact it, but you must remit your claim on whatever any member of your community owes you. There will, however, be no one in need among you, because the Lord is sure to bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a possession to occupy. If you will obey the Lord your God by diligently observing this entire commandment that I command you today, when the Lord your God has blessed you, as he has promised you, you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. You will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. Okay. I'm glad we have a resident bankruptcy attorney here. Okay, how does this work, and what are the implications for the Jewish community since this? Okay, within the Jewish community, you could not be bound to a debt beyond the seventh year. Now, it isn't clear in here if there was a 7-year date that was followed by the whole community, or if it was 7 years from the debt. Okay, that's not entirely clear. There are implications that the year of Jubilee was going to be a whole community event. So I think it's much more likely that there was a 7-year period by which the whole community was bound. So if you lent money within that 7-year period, it might have been in the 6th year, then you'd have to cancel the debt the next year. So I'm sure people were pretty judicious about how they loaned the money. Another thing is that they couldn't charge interest within their community. Now, this did not pertain to debts that were incurred by Gentiles. And one of the things that you'll see all throughout the Middle Ages and before that is that the Jewish community was very often involved in money lending, and they would lend to the Gentile community at interest. Okay, now typically for a long time that interest rate was like 1 or 2%. It was very minimal, but even 1 or 2%, thank you, in some communities was considered onerous. And you will see that there were people in royalty who owed the Jewish community money, and if they didn't want to pay up, they would have a pogrom and they would persecute the Jewish community, and they would persecute Jews and confiscate their property. So that's one of the things that fed into a lot of anti-Semitism. And they were always, Shakespeare wrote that play with Shylock in it, who loaned money to a Gentile and was supposed to get his pound of flesh from the person. And you'll see that the money lender was put into a very bad light, even though the person that he lent the money to was a deadbeat. So the attitude towards Jewry, because they were money lenders, is much like the attitude that a lot of people had when you had a banking system that was corrupt, and your deposits weren't necessarily guaranteed well. But this year of Jubilee applied not just to debts, and we'll see that there are other aspects of it. that applied to people. And you can see also that there's an inequity in the way the Jewish community took care of itself and the way they worked with the Gentile community. Different standards, okay, different lending rates, different terminology, terminations, things like that. One of the other things is that you could not put a person into so much debt in their community. You could not put a person into so much debt that they couldn't repay and they became impoverished, or you would put them in debtor's prison. There wasn't any debtor's prison back then. They didn't have prisons. You were either walking around or you were executed. But you couldn't put a person into poverty. So what this meant was that you had to be judicious in who you lent the money to. So you couldn't be, like Guido's actuarial adjusters lending money. No loan sharking in this, okay? You had to be considerate of the people that you were lending the money to. You couldn't make them overextended. And at the same time, you couldn't deny them a loan just because you were coming up on the year of Jubilee. So if a person needed money and it was coming up on the year of Jubilee, that was not an excuse to deny them a loan. Okay, there might be other excuses, but you couldn't use Jubilee as one of them.
Is this some form of socialism as far as the way it would all?
Oh no, this is capitalism. Okay.
I mean, as far as everybody's going to be, nobody's going to be poor. It's going to balance out, cancel out.
Okay.
Is the way I'm reading this.
It is not socialism. Okay. It's not socialism because there is still consideration about a person's capacity to repay. There is a competition involved in this, and also there is a way to capitalize people within your own community for whatever they were going to do. Okay, so it wasn't like in socialism. It's predetermined who's going to get money and who isn't. Okay, and in socialism, there's kind of an assumption of equal outcomes. There are no equal outcomes in this necessarily, except that in the year of Jubilee, the debts are canceled. Okay, at least in the Jewish community, they're canceled, but they're not canceled for the Gentile community. So there's a lot here. And what they're doing is they're trying to make a banking system that is compassionate toward the person who has received the loan.
These people lending money, are they professional money lenders?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like if I went to you and asked you, could you lend me $100?
It's both. These are individual loans, and they're also loans that are made by somebody who makes their living doing it. Now you're not going to make your living doing it in the Jewish community, so more often than not, these would be like personal loans, something you might lend to a family member, or a business associate, or something like that. But you only made money if you were loaning to the Gentile community.
So what does it mean there must be no poor people among you? What is poor?
That is a term that lacks operational definition. Okay. Someone who has less than they think they should have. Or less than what they need to survive. There were beggars, and we'll actually get into some of that. Okay.
Is this where the Jewish people get the reputation of, Henry Ford, et cetera, being the bankers and the control of the money?
They did control banks. Okay, in the Middle Ages, if you wanted money, You either borrowed it from the Jewish community or you borrowed it from the Templars. And they both, the reason why you would borrow from the Jewish community or from the Templars is that both of them had a very ethical banking system. You could rely on them to keep your money safe. Okay? And you could rely, and the rules of the game were consistent. So the Templars were really interested. The Templars, I think, were the first ones to set up in the Western culture, in Oriental cultures. This was going on well before. But they were the first ones to say, okay, I can put my money with the Templars, and I go on a trip to Jerusalem. And when I get to Jerusalem, I can bring a piece of paper from the Templars in France and present it to the Templars in Jerusalem, and I would get my money from them. And it would be at interest, but it would still be a lot safer than carrying your money from France to Jerusalem. Okay, so that's how they made money, and the Roman Catholic Church got very jealous of the wealth that was accumulated by the Templars, and they persecuted them horribly and just about wiped them out. So and confiscated their assets.
Templars?
The Templars, they're called the Knights Templars, and what they were was they were a knight order to defend the temple in Jerusalem. That's what they were. It was during the Crusades, and they were the knights in Jerusalem that really defended Jerusalem altogether. They also were the ones who defended and secured pilgrims who were going to and from Jerusalem, from Europe. So they would protect caravans and things like that. That was their mission. But they had to be financed, and one of the ways that they financed themselves was through a very good ethical banking system, and they did very well with it. You'll see that Templar assets in Europe before they were annihilated by the church were substantial. You'll see whole castles that were Templar castles and fortresses and things like that. And if you watch the program on Oak Island, it seems like some Templars made it over here too. So anyway, but anyway, that's how their banking system. But okay, you were asking about people who were in poverty. If there is any among you in need, a member of your community in any of your towns within the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You should rather open your hand willingly, lending enough to meet the need, whatever it may be. Be careful that you do not entertain mean thought thinking. I love that, mean thought thinking. The seventh year, the year of remission, is near, and therefore view your needy neighbor with hostility and give nothing. Your neighbor might cry to the Lord against you, and you would incur guilt. Give liberally and be ungrudging when you do so, for on this account the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. Since there will never cease to be some in need on the earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor in your land. So, just as it is today, for some, begging is a profession. And if you were disabled, that was your profession. You were a beggar. We saw, when we were in Taiwan, you did not see beggars on the street very much. They had a system over there where if you were able-bodied, you would be out there sweeping sidewalks or something. You'd be doing something. The government would hire you to do some menial task if you were able-bodied. Nobody had an excuse to just lay back and collect money. But if a person was disabled, you might see them on the street begging, and if you did, you were really supposed to put something in their hand. So if a person was begging, it meant that they really couldn't even have a job. They were that disabled, and so begging was allowed for those individuals over there. I've seen beggars in our streets. It's amazing to me that they're out begging like that.
Drive off in a BMW.
They drive off in a BMW. That's exactly right.
Saw that in Gold.
Yeah.
It's like,
I remember going through Greenville one time, and there was an Italian restaurant. It's closed now, but there was an Italian restaurant. Had a nice grassy patch in front of the restaurant, and there was a guy out there just sitting on the grass with his dog, looking poor. And that guy got so much Italian food, and so did his dog. But anyway, because people look out the window, they're having a big meal, and here's this guy out here, oh, let's get him a plate, you know?
Yeah.
No, he didn't go hungry. But I've had to deal with people like this for a long time, and quite frankly, I'm at the point, I don't give cash to anybody. You know? My dad taught me that. If he saw somebody that was hungry on the street, he'd buy him a meal,
Yeah.
you know? My dad would give a guy the coat off his back, but he wouldn't give him money to go buy a coat,
Right.
because typically
It's not
they buy
good.
something else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's a whole nother sermon for another day.
yeah,
I think we all, I think we all, I mean, I want to help somebody who truly needs help.
right.
But you see so many people that you think, well, why didn't this guy have a job?
Yeah,
I mean, some able, and a lot of them around here that walk up here. You think, this guy looks young and healthy. Why is he not working? Why is he not cutting somebody's grass? Why is he not working somewhere? And those are the people that, you know, you think, I mean, I don't mind, like I said, I don't mind helping somebody who needs help, but I don't want to help somebody's professional beggar or that's how they make their living, just,
Yeah.
I don't know how to handle that.
they make
It's hard.
I know in New York, they make a very good living at it. And they have their spots in the subway and on the street corner, and that's their corner. And you might die if you try to beg on that corner instead of him. You know, that's their place.
That's for church.
I know, Dennis, we're still in Aden, but anyway, somebody wanted some money, needed lunch or something like this, and needed money for the family. Oh, I had these children, my wife and stuff, and Dennis said, bring your family, and they had transportation, bring your family at this restaurant, McDonald's or someplace, at such and such a time, and the church will get you a whole meal, and maybe get some clothes for your children. Didn't show up.
Yeah.
Didn't show
Yeah.
up.
So it's just hard to figure out. I mean, yeah, we all, I think, I'm sure, knowing all of us, that we want to do the right thing, and we want to be Christian, and we want to help our brothers, but we don't want to be taken advantage of.
Right.
And I don't know how you figure out which is which.
It's not easy. We have a food pantry in Aden that I am on sabbatical as the director until I get rid of this gig. But,
Till you move on.
yeah. But we actually vet the people that come in, and we want to see if they're on disability, or if they're you know, if they're on food stamps. There's a chart from USDA that says what income a household can have before they are eligible for USDA benefits. And we use that chart. Now, we don't go in and dig into their finances. We take their word for it pretty much. But at the same time, like if they're getting food stamps, they have to show us the EBT card that they're using. If they're on disability, we want a letter that shows they're on disability, you know, something to verify it. And that's something that if we want to use USDA food, they don't want us to check anybody's word. They can tell us anything they want. We have to take their word for it and keep meticulous records about what they told us, okay? Even though it's baloney.
Yeah.
So what does that make, bottom figure that the USDA says they have to make?
Oh, it varies with how many people are in the household and what the income is per person in the household.
Age.
Yeah, age also. And we cater to those 55 and older in our food pantry. So we want the person to be elderly. But if they are disabled
Elderly.
and younger, we'll help them.
I didn't know I was elderly. Go ahead.
We're all getting there.
In the process.
But yeah, we try to be a little bit more judicious than other food pantries in the area. Okay, so I think of all the food pantries in the area, we're the most restrictive. And we help about 300 families a month.
With really good food.
Yes, with really good food. They get approximately $100 worth of food from the food pantry, and that does not preclude them from going to another food pantry. So there are like 5 food pantries in Aden, and they can hit us and they can hit any of the others. And then there's another one down the street in Grifton, and it's, boy, they give away tons of food, and they're really not too discriminating about who they give it to. And there are food pantries in Greenville that they can go to, and it's amazing. The poor in our area, for the most part, drive up in some, fairly nice cars. Our definition of poor isn't anything compared to what the poverty I saw in other countries. Okay. Our poor look comparatively really rich compared to some of the people who are coming here across our border, but they're getting rich too. Okay, so if a member of your community, whether a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and works for you 6 years, in the 7th year you shall set that person free. And when you send a male slave out from you, a free person, you shall not send him out empty-handed. Provide liberally out of your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress, thus giving him some of the bounty with which the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you for this reason. I lay a command upon you today. But if he says to you, I will not go out from you, because he loves you and your household, and since he is well off with you, then you shall take an awl and thrust it through his earlobe into the door, and he shall be your slave forever. I guess it's hard to do that if you're stuck to the door. But anyway, you shall do the same with regard to your female slave. Okay? Now, what does this mean? Well, generally speaking, these people that they're talking about in here are chattel slaves. These are people who are sold to them. Okay? This is not exactly the same as an indentured servant, which was very common in the early part of our history here, when we were still a British colony. People would come over as indentured servants, and they would owe money for their passage, and they'd have to pay it off. And guess what the term was? 7 years. So they were following the biblical prescription for indentured servitude. And in that 7th year, that person would have to be released. Now, that wasn't a community-wide start date, end date. This was individual, based on the contract that they had with the person who was bringing them over. And that person was an indentured servant. When they were released from their indenture, they would be given a plot of land. And they supposedly, just like this, they were supposed to have a stake in it that they could, they would have a seed to plant or something, but they would be part of the general community. And there was a good reason for that, and there's a good reason for it here, is that these people are much more likely to be productive members of society once they're released from their indenture. If you can capitalize them and get them a start, then they're going to be contributing to the community. Okay? So this is a way of bringing somebody up from poverty to be a productive person. That's the good part of it. The bad part of it is, like for instance, those who were brought over as chattel slaves to the colonies, and it wasn't just Africans, there were others. But if they were brought over as chattel slaves in the colonies, they were not released at the end of 7 years. They and their families were enslaved forever unless their owners went through a very complicated process of freeing them. And the colonies made it as hard as possible for somebody to free a slave. They made the laws so complex that it was really difficult. And you might free one person in the family, but the rest of them would stay enslaved. And the person who got freed would work really hard. Yeah, there we go. The person who was freed, generally speaking, would stay somewhere near the community and have some kind of a job where they could raise enough money to free their wife or their children. If you go through Williamsburg, you'll see some of that. There was a guy who was a slave, His master was really impressed with the guy and went through the process of getting this guy freed, but his family was still enslaved, and he became a barber in Williamsburg and raised enough money to free his spouse. So that's kind of how it went. But if you were an indentured servant, that was one thing. Now, if you were a Hebrew slave, even though you were a chattel slave, you would be freed in the year of Jubilee. If you were a Gentile slave, you would not.
So help me out, 'cause I'm not. So Moses is speaking to his people,
Yes,
and they're in the desert for 40 years.
apparently, yes.
So how is all this happening? I mean, how are they becoming slaves to each other within this time span?
Okay. I think that's an excellent question, and it begs the point of whether or not Moses is actually putting this together, because this is obviously the kind of legal system that you would have in a settled community.
As if he's saying this in the future.
Yeah,
The way
well,
things
that's
are
basically what he's saying. When you come into the land, this is how you're going to conduct yourself.
So he's really not talking, I mean, this is, I'm just really having a hard time understanding how all of this is happening with those people that came out of Egypt, and in 40 years, they're, I don't know, I don't get it.
Good.
You're not on.
Good. I think it's good for us to say, I don't get this, all right? That's what you should be doing with Scripture, is, I don't get this. And look at it and say, should I do this? You know? Or is this the way we should conduct ourselves in our society? Those are really excellent questions. But I think one of the things that you'll see is, if there is a set of laws that pertains to one group of people and does not pertain to another group of people, inevitably there's going to be hostility between those two groups of people. Okay? So this whole idea, and this is one of the things that we are trying to overcome in our own society, is that we try to treat everybody equally. Now, recently, there's been an effort ostensibly to do that, but on the other hand, it's been designed specifically, and this has come into government, it's come into industry, to treat people entirely differently based on their race and ethnicity and gender and whatever else. That can, special consideration is given to person whether they have a skill set or not, based on immutable characteristics. And once you start doing that, you start dividing your workforce, and you start showing, people begin to starting to sue you for that and all kinds of things. So once you have this division between one group of people and another group of people, there's going to be hostility between those two groups of people. And what we as Christians are supposed to do is to not make those kinds of divisions. We're supposed to look at people as all created in God's image, and not differentiate. It's not something that we have fully accomplished yet. We're still stumbling through it, but we have made incredible progress, much more progress than virtually any other society on earth. And I'm glad to see it. We need to. I know that sometimes things flare up, and we embarrass ourselves. But at the same time, I really think that this society is designed to make progress toward the aspirations that our founding fathers had, even though they were slave owners. A lot of them, they built in an aspiration that inevitably would lead to the collapse of slavery, one way or the other, and then go on from there. Because once there was slavery, then there was Jim Crow, and we're getting past that. And, you know, it's step by step by step, and these are hard steps, and they take a long time to do, but there are very few countries in the world that are willing to do it. And openly be embarrassed about the times we make mistakes. Okay?
You know, we get very discouraged to see at the highest level, the presidency, Trump, Biden, pardon this one, pardon that one. If it was my child, he's going to jail. Or if you know, I'm going to jail, then I'm not getting out. But yeah, it's just, again, I'm not
You should
pointing
be
fingers
reporting
at,
FEMA.
I'm pointing fingers at both sides.
What we are saying is that there is not equal justice in this country. Okay? And Biden is saying that about his own administration.
But is the Bible saying that there's equal? No.
No.
They're going to be poor among you.
That's correct.
They're going to be poor among you, and I think that's where a lot of, and I have that problem, because I think, man, I'm so blessed, why is that person not blessed? Blessed in financial means.
Right. Because,
But God said, I mean, what Moses is saying here, there will be poor among you, always.
Jesus said the same thing.
Always among you.
Right. Jesus said
And
the same
so
thing.
When we're working so hard to make everybody equal, maybe equal is not what they mean.
No, they're not,
Financially-
they are still not talking about equity.
Right.
Okay? Socialism speaks of equity. Okay? Capitalism speaks of generosity. Something not compelled. Okay? And it isn't necessarily designed to bring somebody up to your standard of living. It's not. Okay? It is enough to sustain somebody going through difficult times. That's the design. Okay? It is.
Well, isn't that what I hope the design is now, is that, I don't know, that we understand that our equity will not always be the same, but we want to make sure that people have what they need.
We just went through
But-
a very big
So we're trying to
divisive
do
election
more.
about this very thing. Okay, one party was arguing for equity, and they've never provided it. And the other party was saying, be generous. They're just, you know, there was a division in the country. And one of them said that this needs to be compelled, and the other one says this is a free concept. It's up to you. So when you start looking at it, this society was not based on equity. This society was based on more of a capitalistic approach, but also at the same time a much more racial approach. And it's really hard to square the two. And what we're trying to do today is we're trying to square the two. We're trying to not equity, but equality. Not similar outcomes, but similar opportunity. And that one group that has things should be incentivizing people to do better, to come along. The system that we've designed is not very efficient at it. Okay, we've designed a system that divides families in order to get benefits. We've, designed a system that is not necessarily equitable in the way it's distributed. We're still working on these things, but the idea is that we are working on them. Okay, and because we have this dynamic tension going on within our government all the time, we have much better opportunity to actually make a change that will be beneficial. But these changes don't come quickly, and they don't come without a lot of discussion, and sometimes they don't come without a lot of hostility. So we need to be just prepared that this is a dynamic tension society. That's how it was designed, and we should celebrate.
Right, because if we didn't have that, we might not never grow.
Correct.
You've got to have different opinions when you're listening to each other.
Yeah, that was the plan.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're about out of time, but we'll get down to the last sacrifice of the firstborn livestock next week, okay? Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks again for the picture.
Oh, yeah.
You too.